The silent gunslinger of Hollywood harbored a decades-long grudge against the very director who made him a star, a professional betrayal that shaped both men's legendary careers. Rome, 1968. The phone rang in a filmmaker's office. On the other end was Clint Eastwood, the actor this director had transformed from an obscure American TV cowboy into an international film icon. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When the Italian director pitched his latest Western, what would become Once Upon a Time in the West, Eastwood's response was ice cold. "I'm not interested." 3 words that severed their professional relationship forever. No explanation, no negotiation, just silence. Then the click of the receiver. The director was stunned. The man who owed his global stardom to his vision had just walked away without a backward glance. What he couldn't know was that behind Eastwood's terse refusal lay years of simmering resentment, contractual disputes, and a fundamental clash of artistic temperaments that would never be resolved. But to understand how Hollywood's most stoic star came to truly resent the flamboyant auteur who launched his film career, we need to rewind. Clint Eastwood Jr. was born May 31, 1930 in San Francisco during the Great Depression. His family moved frequently during his childhood as his father searched for work, an instability that perhaps shaped Eastwood's later self-reliance. After being drafted during the Korean War, Eastwood found his way to Hollywood through a stroke of luck. A chance meeting with a Universal Studios assistant director who thought his rugged good looks might translate to the screen. By 1959, Eastwood had landed his first significant role as Rowdy Yates in the CBS Western series Rawhide. But after 6 years, his career had plateaued. He was typecast as the clean-cut, conventional American cowboy, far from the complex anti-hero he would later embody. Eastwood was 34 years old, with a family to support and diminishing prospects in an industry where youth was currency. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a revolutionary filmmaker was crafting a new vision for the Western genre. Born in Rome in 1929, this director grew up in cinema. His father, Vincenzo, was a pioneering Italian film director. The young man cut his teeth as an assistant director on American productions filming in Italy, including Quo Vadis, 1951, and Ben-Hur, 1959. He soaked up Hollywood's technical prowess while developing his own distinctive vision. In 1964, this director was preparing to make A Fistful of Dollars, his reinvention of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo as a Western. He needed an unknown American actor who could embody his vision of the laconic, morally ambiguous gunslinger. He initially approached James Coburn and Charles Bronson, but both demanded too much money. When he saw Eastwood on Rawhide, he saw potential, not in spite of Eastwood's limitations as an actor, but because of them. The director offered Eastwood $15,000 for the role, a modest sum, but the opportunity to star in a European film represented an escape route from his television typecasting. In July 1964, Eastwood boarded a plane to Rome, unaware that this decision would transform not just his career, but the entire Western genre. The production of A Fistful of Dollars in Almeria, Spain, was where the seeds of resentment were planted. The director barely spoke English. Eastwood barely spoke Italian. Their communication happened through interpreters and gestures, a fact that would later become emblematic of their relationship. The filmmaker was a perfectionist, shooting countless takes of scenes that Eastwood, with his economical approach to acting, believed were unnecessary. The director obsessed over visual details while providing minimal guidance to his actors. Eastwood, who would later become known for his one-take directing style, found these methods wasteful and indulgent. Despite these tensions, A Fistful of Dollars was released in Italy in 1964 to unexpected success. When it finally reached American theaters in 1967, it made Eastwood an overnight film star. The man with no name was born, a character defined by squinted eyes, a cigar stub, and calculated violence. But by then, the relationship between star and director had already begun its irreversible deterioration. Everyone knows Clint Eastwood as the squint-eyed tough guy with the raspy voice who became an American icon. What most people don't know is the depth of resentment that festered between Eastwood and the visionary director who reinvented the Western, a professional grudge that would span decades and shape both men's careers in ways neither could have anticipated. Why did Eastwood, known for his unflappable demeanor, both on and off screen, harbor such deep-seated animosity toward the very man who helped make him a star? What drove him to walk away from one of cinema's most successful partnerships? And how did this private feud influence two of Hollywood's most significant legacies? Buckle up. We're about to uncover the real story behind Hollywood's most consequential love-hate relationship, a tale of artistic differences, financial disputes, and wounded pride that both men took pains to keep from the public eye. The trilogy that made Eastwood a global star, A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was shot in rapid succession between 1964 and 1966. What many don't realize is that Eastwood never intended to make 3 films with this director. The original agreement was for a single movie. After the unexpected success of A Fistful of Dollars in Italy, the filmmaker and producer Alberto Grimaldi were eager to capitalize with a sequel. Eastwood, however, was hesitant. He had already experienced the exhausting directing style and was concerned about being typecast in Europe just as he had been in America. But the director was persistent, according to Eastwood biographer Patrick McGilligan. The filmmaker leveraged the original contract Eastwood had signed, which reportedly included an option for sequels at similar pay rates. When Eastwood pushed for more money to reflect the first film's success, he and Grimaldi reminded him of his contractual obligations. Rome, summer of 1965. Eastwood arrived for what he believed would be a renegotiation. Instead, he found himself effectively cornered. The meeting ended with Eastwood agreeing to for a few dollars more for a modest raise, far less than what an American star of his emerging caliber would typically command. "I felt like I was being taken advantage of," Eastwood reportedly told a colleague years later, "but I needed the work, and I couldn't afford a legal battle in Italy." The situation worsened with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. By then, A Fistful of Dollars had been released in America to significant acclaim. Eastwood was no longer an unknown TV actor, but a bona fide movie star, yet he found himself committed to completing the trilogy for a fraction of what he believed he was worth. The financial disparity was stark. Eastwood received approximately $250,000 for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, while his co-star Eli Wallach reportedly received a comparable amount, despite having a smaller role. Meanwhile, the director and the producers stood to make millions from international distribution. This contractual stranglehold created a resentment in Eastwood that would never fully dissipate. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect and recognition. While the filmmaker was being hailed as a cinematic innovator, Eastwood felt he was being treated as an interchangeable component in the director's vision. The experience taught Eastwood a harsh lesson about the business of filmmaking, one that would influence his future career decisions and eventually lead him to establish his own production company, Malpaso Productions, to ensure he would never again be at the mercy of others' financial control. But even as he was completing the final film in the trilogy, Eastwood was already plotting his escape from this director's universe. On the dusty sets of Almeria, Spain, where these groundbreaking westerns were primarily shot, a fundamental disconnect was occurring daily. The director, animated and expressive, would deliver lengthy, passionate directions in Italian. Translators would then reduce these impassioned monologues to simple English instructions. Walk to the door. Look angry. Shoot now. For Eastwood, who was developing his own minimalist approach to acting, this created profound frustration. "I never knew what the hell was going on," he reportedly confided to fellow actor Richard Harrison in 1966. "By the time the translation came, I'd lost the feeling of the moment." The filmmaker's style compounded the problem. He would shoot countless takes of scenes that Eastwood felt could be captured in 1 or 2 attempts. The director was obsessive about visual composition, sound design, and minute details that Eastwood, with his economical instincts, considered excessive. During the filming of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966, tensions reached a breaking point. One particular scene required Eastwood to walk across a cemetery. The director demanded take after take, shouting directions in Italian that, when translated, seemed identical to what Eastwood had already done. After the 17th take, Eastwood reportedly threw down his prop gun and stalked off the set. Production halted for hours while intermediaries negotiated his return. When he finally came back, the scene was completed in one more take, exactly as Eastwood had performed it the first time. This growing tension wasn't merely about language. It represented two irreconcilable approaches to filmmaking that would define their relationship and their separate paths forward. Hollywood, 1967. A Fistful of Dollars finally premiered in American theaters 3 years after its Italian release. Critics and audiences were captivated by this new kind of Western, grittier, more stylized, and morally complex. At the center of it all was Eastwood's laconic, poncho-wearing anti-hero. As the film's popularity soared, a subtle but significant battle was brewing over who deserved credit for creating this iconic character. In interviews with American press, director Sergio Leone emphasized his directorial vision, frequently noting that he had transformed Eastwood from a wooden TV actor into a movie star. "I needed a mask, not an actor," Leone told American film critic Roger Ebert in 1969, a quote that would eventually get back to Eastwood. And Eastwood, at that time, was only a mask. With the poncho, the cigar, the squint, I created a character. For Eastwood, these statements cut deep. While he acknowledged Leone's directorial contributions, he believed the character's essential qualities, the minimalist acting style, the quiet intensity, were his own innovations, born from his instinctive understanding of screen presence. According to Eastwood's longtime friend and production partner Robert Daly, Eastwood had developed many aspects of the character himself. The squint was his solution to the bright Spanish sun. The cigar was his idea for giving the character a distinctive prop. Even the famous poncho was chosen by Eastwood from wardrobe options. "I brought a lot of myself to that character," Eastwood told Playboy magazine in 1974. "Leone had visual ideas, but the character came from me." This credit dispute extended beyond interviews. When Eastwood launched his directing career with Play Misty for Me in 1971, Leone dismissively told Italian press that Eastwood was merely imitating directorial techniques he had observed on Leone's sets, a claim that reached Eastwood through industry channels. Meanwhile, Eastwood's rising prominence in Hollywood allowed him to subtly reshape the narrative around the Dollars trilogy. In promotional appearances and interviews, he would acknowledge Leone's films as an important step in his career, but increasingly emphasized how he had moved beyond them with more sophisticated projects like Dirty Harry, 1971, and his own directorial efforts. By the mid-1970s, each man had constructed his own version of their shared history, versions that minimized the other's contributions while emphasizing their own creative vision. What had once been a collaborative artistic relationship, however fraught, had devolved into a battle over legacy, and as their careers continued to diverge, Leone making fewer but more ambitious films, Eastwood becoming one of Hollywood's most bankable stars and respected directors, the gulf between their accounts only widened. The credit war wasn't merely about ego, it was about artistic legitimacy and historical recognition. Both men understood that how this chapter of film history was written would shape their legacies for generations to come. But perhaps the most painful dispute was yet to emerge. Rome, 1967. While A Fistful of Dollars was finally being released in the United States, a financial scandal was quietly unfolding behind the scenes, one that would deepen Eastwood's resentment toward Leone and the Italian film industry that had launched his movie career. The Dollars trilogy had been an international phenomenon, grossing over $280 million worldwide, approximately $2.3 billion in today's money. Yet the financial rewards for this success were distributed in ways that Eastwood would later describe as highway robbery. The trouble began with the production structure itself. The films were made under complex international co-production agreements involving Italian, Spanish, and German companies. This arrangement allowed producers to secure financing from multiple countries, but also created a labyrinthine accounting system that obscured the film's true profitability. According to film historian Christopher Frayling, Eastwood's contracts entitled him to a percentage of profits from American distribution. However, through creative accounting methods common in European cinemas at the time, much of the film's revenue was attributed to markets outside the profit-sharing agreement. When Eastwood's representatives requested accounting statements in 1968, they were met with delays, incomplete documentation, and figures that dramatically underrepresented the trilogy's success. Even more troubling were reports that reached Eastwood about unauthorized use of his image and voice. In Germany and parts of Asia, the films had been marketed with Eastwood's face prominently featured on merchandise, posters, clothing, even cigars, for which he received no compensation. In some markets, local distributors had created unauthorized sequels using footage from the trilogy, spliced with new material featuring Eastwood lookalikes. Eastwood believed Leone and producer Alberto Grimaldi had failed to protect his likeness rights and, worse, might have been complicit in these exploitation schemes. While no direct evidence implicated Leone in the unauthorized merchandising, Eastwood felt the director had a responsibility to safeguard the integrity of their collaboration. The financial disputes came to a head in 1969 when Eastwood's lawyers discovered that United Artists, the American distributor, had paid significantly more for the trilogy than had been disclosed to Eastwood's team. The difference amounted to millions of dollars in potential profit participation that Eastwood never saw. They treated me like some rube from American television who wouldn't know the difference, Eastwood reportedly told a colleague. But I learned. Oh, I learned. Indeed, the experience transformed Eastwood's approach to business. By 1975, he had established complete control over his films through Malpaso Productions, negotiated director-friendly distribution deals with Warner Brothers, and developed a reputation as one of Hollywood's most financially astute artists. Leone, meanwhile, found himself increasingly marginalized in the American film industry. His ambitious projects faced financing challenges, and his relationship with U.S. distributors remained complicated by lingering questions about the dollar's accounting. What began as a creative partnership had deteriorated into a case study in international film finance at its most exploitative. And for Eastwood, the lesson was clear. Trust no one with your artistic or financial future, especially not those who claim to have made you a star. But the most personal wound was yet to come. Venice Film Festival, September 1984. Leone was presenting his epic Once Upon a Time in America, a film that had faced brutal editing for its American release. During a press conference, an Italian journalist asked Leone about Eastwood, who by then had directed 10 films including the critically acclaimed The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, and Honky Tonk Man, 1982. Leone's response was dismissive. Eastwood moves like a sleepwalker between explosions and hails of bullets, and he is always the same, a block of marble. Bobby Kennedy has been shot, Martin Luther King has been shot, but Eastwood is a hero who never makes a mistake. The critique continued. As an actor, Eastwood is virtually immobile, both physically and facially. As a director, he has nothing to say and no way to say it. These comments, reported in Variety and eventually reaching Hollywood, represented a public humiliation that Eastwood would not forget. After 2 decades of carefully measured public statements about Leone, the Italian director had broken their unspoken truce. Eastwood, by then one of Hollywood's most powerful figures, maintained his characteristic public silence about Leone. But privately, according to his biographer Richard Schickel, he was furious. "What did I ever do to deserve that?" he reportedly asked a friend. "I've always acknowledged his contribution to my career. The timing of Leone's attack made it particularly wounding. Eastwood was in a period of artistic expansion, moving beyond action films to more personal projects. Leone's characterization of him as a one-dimensional performer and empty director threatened to undermine this evolution." What made Leone's critique especially ironic was that by 1984, Eastwood had directed more films than Leone and had developed a distinctive, economical style that many critics were beginning to recognize as significant. While Leone made one film every 5 or 6 years, Eastwood was consistently producing and directing quality work that expanded his range. The festival comments weren't Leone's first public criticism of Eastwood. In a 1976 interview with French magazine Positif, Leone had suggested that Eastwood's directing style was simplistic, saying, "He copies without understanding." In 1980, speaking to American film critic Lawrence Grobel, Leone dismissed Eastwood's performances in his own films, claiming, "He only had 2 expressions, with hat and without hat." Each barb reinforced Eastwood's perception that Leone was determined to diminish his contributions and talent, perhaps out of jealousy over Eastwood's sustained Hollywood success, while Leone struggled to finance his increasingly ambitious projects. What Leone may never have understood was how these public dismissals contradicted his simultaneous claims of having created Eastwood as a film star. If Eastwood was merely Leone's creation, then his subsequent success reflected well on Leone. By attacking that success, Leone undermined his own legacy. For Eastwood, who had endured Leone's demanding directorial style, contractual constraints, and financial disputes, these public insults were the final confirmation that the Italian director had never truly respected him as an artist. And, as both men's careers continued to evolve, one final confrontation would crystallize their complex relationship. Los Angeles, 1988. Leone was in Hollywood developing what would be his final project, Once Upon a Time in America 2. Through intermediaries, Leone expressed interest in meeting with Eastwood, their first contact in nearly 2 decades. The proposed meeting carried significant symbolism. Leone, whose health was declining, seemed to be reaching out to the actor who had helped launch his international career. Industry insiders speculated about a potential reconciliation project, perhaps a final Western that would reunite the two legends who had reinvented the genre. Eastwood's response was delivered through his production company. He was unavailable due to his directing schedule on Bird, his Charlie Parker biopic. The message was polite but firm. There would be no meeting, no reconciliation, no final collaboration. According to those close to Eastwood, this wasn't merely a scheduling conflict. It was a deliberate decision to close the door on a relationship that had brought him both opportunity and frustration. After years of Leone's public criticism, Eastwood saw no value in revisiting the past. What Leone intended with his outreach remains unclear. Some biographers suggest he genuinely hoped to mend fences at the end of his life. Others believe he was simply exploring casting options for his new project, with Eastwood being one possibility among many. Whatever the motivation, the rejection was symbolic of their relationship's terminal state. Two men who had created cinema history together couldn't even sit in the same room 20 years later. Leone never completed his final project. He died of a heart attack in April 1989, aged 60. Eastwood, who was filming Pink Cadillac when he heard the news, offered a brief professional statement to the press. Sergio Leone was a part of film history. His contribution to the Western genre cannot be overstated. The carefully worded tribute was notable for what it didn't say. There was no mention of personal loss, no reminiscence about their time working together, no sense of a shared journey cut short. Just an acknowledgement of historical significance, as one might reference a distant colleague, rather than a formative creative partner. In the years following Leone's death, Eastwood would occasionally acknowledge the director's visual style and influence on his career when directly asked. But he never elaborated on their personal relationship and steered conversations toward his subsequent work with directors like Don Siegel, whom Eastwood openly described as a mentor in ways he never did Leone. The meeting that never happened became the final chapter in a relationship defined by what remained unsaid, by distances that were never bridged, by wounds that never healed, by a fundamental inability to reconcile two powerful creative visions, and perhaps most tellingly, by Eastwood's systematic effort to define himself against the very films that had made him a star. Hollywood, 1971. Eastwood was preparing his directorial debut, Play Misty for Me. During pre-production meetings, he made an unusual request to his cinematographer, Bruce Surtees. "I don't want any of those extreme close-ups or those Leone angles." This wasn't a casual preference. It was the beginning of a deliberate strategy to distance himself aesthetically from the director who had launched his film career. Leone's visual style was instantly recognizable. Extreme close-ups of squinting eyes, wide panoramic landscapes contrasted with intimate details, and operatic scene construction. These techniques had defined the Dollars trilogy, and by extension, Eastwood's initial screen persona. As Eastwood developed his own directorial voice, he systematically avoided these hallmarks. Where Leone's style was flamboyant and self-conscious, Eastwood's became understated and efficient. Where Leone lingered on visual details, Eastwood cut to the essential action. Where Leone's scores were prominent and thematic, Eastwood often chose minimal ambient music or jazz. This aesthetic distancing extended to Eastwood's acting choices as well. In films like Dirty Harry, 1971, and The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, he maintained the laconic quality that had defined the man with no name, but stripped away the stylized elements. His characters became more naturalistic, embedded in recognizable American settings rather than Leone's mythic frontier. Even Eastwood's approach to violence evolved in conscious counterpoint to Leone's operatic bloodshed. In Leone's films, violence was theatrical and sometimes glorified. In Eastwood's own westerns like Unforgiven, 1992, violence was portrayed as brutal, consequential, and morally complex. According to cinematographer Jack and Green, who worked with Eastwood on multiple films, the directive remained consistent throughout Eastwood's career. Clint never wanted anything that would remind viewers of Leone. It was almost superstitious, like he was exorcising a ghost. This deliberate reinvention wasn't merely artistic, it was personal. Eastwood was determined to prove that his success transcended the Leone collaboration. Each film he directed served as evidence that his artistic vision was distinct and self-sufficient. By the mid-1980s, Eastwood had succeeded in creating a directorial identity so distinct from Leone's that film critics rarely mention the Italian director when analyzing Eastwood's work. His films became known for their economy, their moral complexity, and their distinctly American sensibility, all qualities that differentiated them from Leone's operatic style. Perhaps the most telling evidence of this successful reinvention came in 1992, when Unforgiven won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. In his acceptance speech, Eastwood thanked numerous influences, but made no mention of Leone. The omission was widely noted in film circles, particularly given that Unforgiven represented Eastwood's definitive statement on the Western genre that he and Leone had helped transform. Through decades of careful artistic choices, Eastwood had achieved what once seemed impossible. He had made audiences and critics forget that his career began under Leone's direction. He had rewritten his own origin story, but this deliberate distancing came at a cost, not just to Leone's legacy, but to a complete understanding of cinema history and to Eastwood himself. Not everything between these two cinematic giants was defined by animosity. Despite their differences, moments of professional respect and even reconciliation occasionally surfaced through the decades of their estrangement. In a 1975 interview with Film Comment, Leone acknowledged Eastwood's growing directorial skill. "He has learned much since our time together. His eye is developing." Coming from Leone, known for his harsh criticism, this qualified praise represented a rare moment of professional recognition. Similarly, in his 1986 autobiography, Eastwood wrote, "Leone taught me the power of the image, of telling a story visually before relying on words." This acknowledgement of Leone's influence, however brief, suggested that Eastwood could separate his personal feelings from his artistic assessment. There were also lost opportunities for reconciliation. In 1980, both men attended the Cannes Film Festival but stayed at different hotels and maintained separate schedules despite being informed of each other's presence. According to festival organizers, neither made any effort to arrange a meeting. Film historian and critic Richard Schickel, who became close to Eastwood while writing his biography, suggested that time had softened some of Eastwood's harder feelings. By the 1990s, Clint could appreciate Leone's contribution to cinema more objectively. The personal wounds had scarred over, even if they hadn't completely healed. After Leone's death in 1989, Eastwood occasionally spoke more generously about their collaboration. During a 1992 retrospective of his career at the Museum of Modern Art, Eastwood noted, "Those films with Leone changed everything, not just for me, but for how Westerns were made. Whatever our differences, that remains true." Perhaps most significantly, elements of Leone's influence occasionally surfaced in Eastwood's later work. The extended standoff scene in For a Few Dollars More found echoes in the tense showdown in Unforgiven. The moral ambiguity of Leone's frontier reappeared in Mystic River, 2003, and Gran Torino, 2008. These moments suggest that beneath the public narrative of estrangement lay a more complex relationship, one where creative influence transcended personal animosity, and where each man's artistic legacy remained inextricably, if uncomfortably, linked to the other. Yet these glimpses of reconciliation were fragmentary and incomplete, footnotes to a relationship primarily defined by distance, disagreement, and deliberate separation. Why did Clint Eastwood keep his true feelings about Sergio Leone private for so many decades? Why, even after Leone's death, did he speak of their relationship only in the most measured professional terms? The answer lies at the intersection of Hollywood image management, generational values, and Eastwood's own carefully constructed public persona. For Eastwood, maintaining control over his public narrative was paramount. From his earliest days as a contract player at Universal, he observed how Hollywood's machinery could define an actor's image independently of their own wishes. The lesson was clear. Those who controlled their story controlled their career. Eastwood's generation of male stars, raised during the Depression, coming of age during World War II, approached professional conflicts with a stoicism that contemporary celebrities might find foreign. Grievances were private matters. Disputes were handled behind closed doors. Public complaints were seen as signs of weakness or unprofessionalism. Clint believes in handling things directly or not at all. Longtime friend and producer Robert Daly once noted, "Going to the press with personal problems was never his style." This reticence aligned perfectly with the screen persona Eastwood had developed, the laconic man of few words who resolved conflicts through action rather than complaint. To publicly air grievances against Leone would have contradicted the very image that made Eastwood marketable. There were practical considerations as well. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as Eastwood was establishing himself as a director, any public feud with Leone would have overshadowed discussion of his own work. Film journalists would have inevitably framed Eastwood's directorial efforts in relation to Leone, rather than on their own merits. The international nature of the film business added another layer of complexity. Eastwood's films enjoyed substantial popularity in Europe, including Italy. A public break with one of Italy's most celebrated directors might have alienated that audience and complicated distribution arrangements. Perhaps most significantly, Eastwood understood that his connection to Leone, however fraught, was a foundational chapter in his career narrative. To openly repudiate Leone would mean destabilizing his own origin story. Better to acknowledge the professional relationship minimally while focusing attention forward. Leone, for his part, had less incentive for discretion. As his career faced increasing difficulties securing financing for ambitious projects like Once Upon a Time in America, emphasizing his role in launching Eastwood's stardom reinforced his own significance in film history. The result was an asymmetrical public narrative. Leone occasionally criticized Eastwood in interviews, while Eastwood maintained a diplomatic silence that revealed little of his true feelings. This strategy served Eastwood well. By the time he won his first directing Oscar for Unforgiven in 1992, his artistic identity was so firmly established that few critics or audiences associated him primarily with Leone's films. He had successfully managed the narrative of his career on his own terms. The cost of this silence, however, was a simplified public understanding of one of cinema's most consequential creative partnerships, a relationship far more complex and contentious than either man publicly acknowledged. Rome, 1968. The phone rang in Sergio Leone's office. Clint Eastwood's refusal to appear in Once Upon a Time in the West marked the end of one of cinema's most influential yet troubled collaborations. Leone would go on to cast Charles Bronson in the role he had intended for Eastwood. The film would become a masterpiece of the genre, but it would also be one of Leone's last. He would direct only 2 more features before his death in 1989. Eastwood, meanwhile, would transform from actor to actor-director to Academy Award-winning filmmaker, creating a body of work that explored American themes with increasing complexity and nuance. So who did Clint Eastwood truly resent more than anyone else in his long career? The evidence points squarely to Sergio Leone, the man who discovered him yet dismissed him, who launched his film career yet constrained it, who created with him yet claimed credit for him. This resentment wasn't a simple matter of personal dislike. It was rooted in fundamental conflicts about artistry, business ethics, public recognition, and creative control. It was about 2 strong-willed visionaries with irreconcilable approaches to their craft. Yet paradoxically, each man's legacy remains incomplete without the other. Leone's revolutionizing of the Western genre achieved global impact largely through Eastwood's iconic presence. Eastwood's evolution as an actor and director began with the creative tensions of working with Leone. They were reluctant collaborators in one of cinema's most fruitful partnerships, two men who created movie history together while barely speaking the same language, literally or figuratively. The silent gunslinger and the operatic director. Their relationship ended with a phone call, but their complicated legacy continues to echo through film history, like a lone whistle on the wind, carrying across a landscape they reimagined together, then apart.